wrap up Empedocles here, so page 147. Okay, Eric, page 147. And we'll read a couple of these testimonies. C19.
It would be observed that someone such as Empedocles were his host. He was offering a clear-cut statement and describing the sea as the sweat of the earth. Such a metaphorical way of speaking, while suitable for the purposes of poetry, contributes nothing whatever to a knowledge of nature.
Okay, right. So calling the sea the sweat of the earth. So basically, he's criticizing his style. Like, he's writing in this extremely poetic style, as you could tell. And so, like, what is that actually supposed to mean? The sea is the sweat of the earth, right? I mean, so basically it's a metaphor, right? And so this is the basic logical point that, right? In logic, you try to avoid metaphors, and in philosophy in general, you try to avoid metaphors, and also in science, right? If you pick up a book on geology, it's not going to say the sea is the sweat of the earth. Right? It's not going to use some metaphor like that. Okay, page 150, C33. This is, so even though he could give the impression that in the fragments he never denies that there's a God, the testimonies, I think, make pretty clear that he's a materialist.
He calls the elements gods, and their intermixture is the universe.
Okay, right. So that doesn't seem to leave room for any kind of spiritual God like in Xenophanes. On page 151, it says thinking.
Thinking and perceiving are the same. It is mainly by blood that we think, for in blood all the elements are mingled. Those
Right.
in whom
That's okay. So thinking and sensing, perceiving is how we translate it, but it's really the word sensing. Thinking and sensing are the same. So instead of there being thought, which is higher than the body, which is actually what we're going to see in Anaxagoras next, that the mind is higher than the body, and that there's even a divine mind, which basically harkens back to Xenophanes. But he just says thinking and sensing are the same, right? There's not a real difference there. That's what a modern materialist like Hobbes will say, right? Hobbes is the first materialist in the modern period. He's a contemporary of Descartes. And he says, there's no special thing called thinking. It's just a higher form of sensation. It's a higher form of imagination, but there is no spiritual soul that you have as a different operation of thinking. That's how Hobbes and pretty much all materialists are going to agree on that. Next page, C39, Michael.
Death, he says, consists in a separation of the fiery particles of matter from out of the mixture of which the soul is composed, so that the death of the body and death of the soul occurs simultaneously. In sleep, he explains, is a temporary separation of this kind.
Now, this is from Theophrastus, who is a colleague, actually, of Aristotle. Aristotle died when he was about 62, and Theophrastus lived until he was 80. Remember we mentioned about Aquinas and Albert. Albert lived until he was 80. So Theophrastus, even though he was older than Aristotle, he outlived Aristotle. But this is a pretty reliable source, right? This isn't Diogenes Laertius, who's writing in 200 AD, right, 500 years after Aristotle. This is Theophrastus, who's actually, right, not very long after Empedocles was alive. And so notice, this is why, even though there's so many texts where he talks about reincarnation, I used to think, well, obviously Empedocles holds reincarnation. But then I realized maybe he's, right, as an ex-Pythagorean, maybe he's just giving away their secret. And also kind of making fun of it at the same time, like you used to be a bush, right? It's kind of silly to imagine yourself as a bush, right? What were you like when you were a bush? What were your memories like? The more you think about it, it really does seem kind of silly, right? So when you see a text like this, right, Theophrastus, who presumably had access to Empedocles' poem, right? He doesn't say, the soul is reincarnated. He just says, the death of the body and the death of the soul occur simultaneously, right? So your soul is dying. Your soul dies because it's made out of matter, right? The fiery particles of matter, come out of the mixture of which the soul is composed. So Heraclitus seems to be your soul is made of fire, right? Empedocles, being a pluralist, says maybe it's made of fire and air. That would be makes sense, right? And so once it dissipates when you die, and then that's it, you're gone, right? So that when Empedocles talked about, oh, you know, I've been lived before, and now I'm living again, and I'm a fugitive from the gods, like that would all be his paraphrase of Pythagoras, but not his actual teaching.
I was just kind of considering, is it also possible, since it seems like Empedocles may believe that the soul is a composite of like the elements, that the reincarnation is like the elements dispersed and then rearranged in some other form?
Problem is, it just says the depth, right? So Pythagoras, what does Pythagoras say your soul is? Do you remember?
It's immortal.
Immortal. So this contradicts the idea that the soul is immortal. And remember, was that new to say that the soul is immortal?
For Pythagoras?
Was it new for ancient Greece?
Yeah.
Who did they say was immortal before that?
The gods.
Did they ever say the soul was immortal?
No.
No. If you look at Edith Hamilton, and remember, she does know about the myths. She is good at that. She's not really a philosopher per se, right? But she does know about the myths. So she'll never say the soul is immortal, unless you're talking about Plato or Pythagoras. But he was the first one to ever say the soul is immortal, at least in the Greek world. I don't know about whatever, ancient Egypt or something. And so the very fact that the soul dies, it shouldn't be able to do that if this is Pythagoras, right? So that's even though there's so many quotes about reincarnation, it seems, like I said, I used to think, well, he obviously accepts reincarnation. And then I thought, well, maybe he had an early period where he accepted reincarnation and a later period when he rejected it. The problem with that is none of the testimonies talk about that. None of them say, oh, he wrote the first poem and then he changed his mind for the second poem. And you would expect them to mention something that important, like, because they would want to let you know that he changed his mind. Because, right, otherwise it would raise questions of authorship, like, was it written by the same person? You know, that kind of thing. So the death of the soul is pretty important. Now, whether he may think the soul is made of more than one element, he does think the soul is made of more than one element, because he's a pluralist, right? So when he says the fiery particles of matter from out of the mixture of which the soul is composed, you don't have to say he might think it's made of more than one element. It is made of more than one element, because he's saying that it's a mixture, right? He's a pluralist. Everything, pretty much everything, right? Maybe not fire itself, but pretty much everything is a mixture of the four elements, including the soul. That's what most likely fire and air, right? And when the heat comes out of the air, like your breath is, I don't know, you're breathing out warm air, that means that you're dead and your soul is gone. It's not. So the death of the body and the death of the soul occur simultaneously, which is exactly what does Pythagoras think?
It lives on as reincarnated.
Exactly. So the death of the body does not coincide with the death of the soul. It keeps going. So, and once again, if it were a later figure like Cicero, who's writing in 50 BC, and who spoke Latin, not Greek, I mean, he probably knew some Greek, but still, right? Then you could say, well, maybe, who knows, right? But given that this is Theophrastus who's talking, who's, right, probably lived about, 80 years after Empedocles, maybe 100 years after Empedocles, it changes, right, how you would take it. Actually, on that, I guess we could read, I want to read T40. Michael, were you reading?
Yeah.
T40.
Empedocles declares that what gave our souls their being and first principle was not a mingling of blood and breath, that the body, earthborn and mortal, was shaped by the soul, which came to it from elsewhere, from which reason he describes birth as a journey.
Okay. Now, one thing. So now we're back. So remember that idea that he holds reincarnation. It's not like wheelwright, or it's like I'll be the first one to come up with that. Right. The difference here, which is Plutarch is after Christ. So Plutarch is 400 or 500 years later, and it's true, right? He does talk about that, but you'd have to be aware that he's an ex-Pythagorean who was kicked out of the Pythagorean school, and that's like testimony. The first testimony there from Diogenes Laertius. I mean, we're not going to read it, but I'm sorry, T27 from later Greek sources. Although he's not quite perfect there. on 148 it says from later Greek sources, so that's where it talks about him getting kicked out of the Pythagoreans. But Theophrastus is not a later Greek source, so if he had had a good copy editor, the copy editor could have. Copy editor's job is to fix the content, not just the words. The proofreader fixes the words, like, oh, you misspelled the word, or the grammar is wrong. But the copy editor is supposed to fix the content as well. So a copy editor just said, wait a minute, Theophrastus is not a later. Theophrastus was born before Aristotle. That's not a later Greek source. So that might have been confusing. So here you have Plutarch, but what's interesting maybe here, Plutarch was a Platonist, right? And Plato held reincarnation, as we're going to see shortly. So you could see how maybe if you're a Platonist, you're going to want to read Empedocles as a Pythagorean who held reincarnation. Whereas Theophrastus, who's not a Platonist, who's basically an Aristotelian, right? He was Aristotle's friend. Theophrastus is going to say, oh, no, he says that the soul dies. Number 41, Michael.
The soul he declares to be a mixture primarily of air and ether.
Okay, so that Loeb edition that I mentioned, Physiocratics, they're good on this. They have a glossary in that first volume. It's like 15 volumes, something like that. The first volume has an extended glossary of terms and explains that air in Greek means like kind of like damp air, and ether means the air by the clouds. It's very dry. So they have two words for air, and that's what ether originally meant, was the dry air that's bright. Like obviously for us to call air bright is very silly, but this is several thousand years ago. So the bright air up by the clouds that's dry, and then the damp, more misty air that's down by earth is what they call air. So they actually have about 3-4 different words for air. There's other words as well. Not modern science exactly.
So in T40, is he saying that the soul pre-exists the body, and then when they separate, both die?
Anybody?
Well, he's a materialist, so he wouldn't think that the soul pre-exists the body, and that it's some sort of combination of elements that are creating consciousness, or
Exactly.
yeah,
Like about the blood, right?
blood.
Thinking and sensing are the same. It is mainly by blood that we think. That's a decidedly materialist statement, right? That we think with our blood, right? And then your blood runs out. Can there be thinking in it then? After all your blood runs out, no. Once your blood stops pumping, can you still think? No. It sounds silly, but it's the exact same thing, right? The moderns say, once those neurons stop firing, it's over. Goodbye, you. Right? So that's why, why don't we read it? Matthew, do you want to read? Or who's next? Ryan, let's just read the little text, just so you can see where I'm getting this.
Okay, where are we?
Just the text that talks about, it talks about him being ex-Pythagorean. So it's on page 148.
148, okay.
At the bottom, Timaeus. Timaeus is also,
I see it.
so you have to immerse yourself in ancient Greek philosophy, right, to be familiar with this stuff. So I'm honestly, I'm not expecting you guys, there's no way you would know any of this stuff unless you already have a degree in philosophy, or probably about an advanced degree, right? But Timaeus is one of the interlocutors, right, in one of the later dialogues of Plato. So he is a historical figure, and it's the name of one of the Platonic dialogues. So as soon as I see the word Timaeus, I'm like, okay, that's someone who is even before Aristotle. So does that mean there's a good chance he knows what he's talking about? Yes, right? If we're talking about Cicero, he's 400 years later, and he doesn't even speak Greek. Remember Cicero? Have you guys read about him in Latin class? He spoke Latin, right? So when he says something, who should I trust, Timaeus or Cicero?
Timaeus is closer to the source, right?
Exactly, right. And plus, he lives in Greece. He's Greek. See what I mean? So that's why with the Pre-Socratics, it's also showing you how history of philosophy works. I mean, and you're going to see the same thing in theology. I'm sure you're already seeing the same thing with Scripture. Like, should we say there's one Isaiah? Should we say there's three? You have to weigh the arguments for and against. In my opinion, there's one Isaiah. I don't think the arguments for many Isaiahs is convincing. But I give arguments for why there's one Isaiah. I don't just say, oh, there has to be one Isaiah because I'm Catholic and I believe whatever the Bible says, it says it. But no, that's fine if you want to make arguments for many Isaiahs. But to me, those arguments aren't convincing. See what I mean? So as soon as I see Timaeus, I'm like, oh, okay, pre-Aristotle, contemporary Plato might have even been born when Empedocles was an old man, you see, as opposed to like Plutarch, who's what, 150 AD, something like that? Like 100 years after Christ died, right? See the difference? Okay.
So, Timaeus further declares that Empedocles had been a pupil of Pythagoras, but that he had been convinced of
But
publishing
he's
some
been convicted.
convicted. I beg your pardon.
It's all right.
convicted of
I'm the
publishing-
one who's talking about the unicorns, and not finishing my sentence. So the unicorns are all in my head. I know it's what I'm supposed to be saying, but the words were. Sorry.
Of publishing some of the Pythagorean verses, for which reason he was disbarred from the discussions held by the school.
Now, not only that, but he actually says he published some of the verses. So it could, because when you think about it, like that idea, I'm a fugitive from the gods, that's a very striking image, right? I'm a fugitive from the gods, I'm back into the cavern, that's an extremely striking image. I'd be very surprised to see that coming from a materialist. Like, materialists, we're not fugitives from the gods. Remember, we didn't read the text about evolution, but right, he's one of the main sources on evolution after Anaximander. He talks about various forms and slowly. There's a couple of these where he mentions that. Oh, did we read that? Let's read on page 47. I know we're jumping around, but jumping around is how you can kind of get what's going on. We want to contrast what we know about Pythagoras.
147, 147.
Go back to page 134,
134.
and this is going to be his extremely poetic way of talking about evolution. And see, like, because remember, there are ancient sources who will say, Empedocles said there's a soul, it's immortal, there's reincarnation, there's a God with a capital G. But is that actually what he thinks? Timothy, do you want to read page 134, number 47?
47. There sprang up on the earth many heads without necks, arms wandering unattached to shoulders, and eyes straying about in want of foreheads. Isolated limbs were wandering about.
Now, I do think he's trying to be funny. I really do, because this is just pretty silly. But you see, this is like, is there a God here who's putting order, who's making the body? What's causing the bodies to be generated? Just chance. Is there a divine mind that's putting design into it from above? And Anaxagoras is going to talk about the divine mind? No, right? Even though it's literally comical, I think he's trying to be funny, but he's making his point. There's no providence here. Not only is there not a Zeus or a Prometheus, I think it was Prometheus who actually made the first humans in the myth, but there's not a god of Xenophanes either, making the honey and the figs and stuff. Keep going, Tim.
Many creatures were born with faces and chests turned in different directions. There were offspring
So think of the idea of like mutations. There's mutations and some are successful and some are not. And this is what Darwin was teaching in 1846, and people treated it was like it was this huge discovery. But it seems like we have the core of that idea here in 400 BC. And we do, right? Okay. Which, by the way, some people were aware of that. The public image of Darwin was that it was a new discovery. But of course, people who were scholars knew that it wasn't. Okay.
There were offspring of oxen with faces of men, while on the other hand, there were human offspring that had the faces of oxen. And there were creatures in which the masculine and the feminine natures were combined, the result of which was sterility.
So that randomness, is this order or what is it? It's chaos. So somehow out of the chaos, just order just springs spontaneously, right? When you don't have a God, when you don't have a divine intelligence, that's what has to happen. Because nature is chaotic, but somehow just out of the chaos springs life, springs order, springs eventually progression until finally there's humans who have blood that works in a way where we can think. Great, we're the Goldilocks animal, right? We're the lucky ones. It's all a matter of luck. Eventually an animal developed that over time, the other ones died out, and then this one that had blood that can think is the one. The difference now is to say, well, now obviously the details are different, but the core idea is identical. That there's no divine intelligence. There's just purely material causes, as Aristotle would say. Let's just finish reading them.
There were shambling creatures with innumerable heads. As demon copulated with demon things came together by pure chance, with the result that many novelties sprang into being.
I might think, oh, well, he's talking about the daimons here. He must be talking about spirits. I mean, would that be consistent?
Doesn't seem.
Wouldn't well, once again, Theophrastus says, right? He says the soul doesn't exist. So what could spirit mean here? Daimon means spirit.
Is he talking about elements coming together?
Exactly, right. Different elements, like maybe like a combination of air and fire, right? Like you think of a diamond. Spirits kind of has a note. The word spirit, pneuma, means breath. So the words for spirit often go out to the words for breath. Remember, psyche is from cooling breath. So words for soul and spirit often come from the words for breath, right? The etymology tells you a lot about how people conceive of this. So by daimon here, he could mean a spirit, the element of air, but maybe air mixed with some fire, or maybe it's the ether. Maybe some of that ether came down, and that's what caused life to spring up. But notice, things came together by pure chance, with the result that novelties sprang into being. So, right, that's the whole idea of evolution for Darwin, is that it's undirected, right? There's no intelligence behind it. There's no order behind it. It's just things randomly happen, and then some of them are successful, others aren't. Okay.
So listen now to my account of how fire, by separating, caused the night-born offspring of men and of tearful women to rise. For mine is no trifling or foolish tale. First there sprang up out of the earth whole nature forms of having a due share of both water and fire. The fire, desiring to reach up to its life, produced growth in the creatures, even before they had developed shapely limbs, voices, and generative organs.
Right. See, that goes together with number 50. As like even the fact of like spirits joining. Remember, copular means to join. Spirits joining with spirits, right? So then things came together by chance. This isn't like I don't know, the nymphs and the dryads, right? Remember mythos versus logos? The spirits could just be talking about air, hot air, different kinds of air. Remember, there's 4 different words for air in ancient Greek at that point. And then the next one, right? Fire, by separating, caused the night-born offspring of men and tearful women to arise. So what's the cause of generation? Well, it's ultimately fire. So this is what you call reductionism, materialist reductionism. You can explain it all in terms of elements. What would they say in the 21st century? Your brain? Just explain it all in terms of neurons firing. What are neurons firing? It's electricity. So basically, you're just kind of a sophisticated robot. Right? You have this special kind of electricity in your head that allows you to think abstractly. Like your neurons are being in such a way, and the neurons firing, right? Reductionism. It's no different than the lights, the light bulbs. That's actually what materialists would say, right? So you see, the fire is what caused it to happen. For mine is no trifling or foolish tale, unlike what? The myths, or unlike Pythagoras, right? So see how would that match up with, if we're supposed to take daimons as like spirits? Then it would just completely contradict itself. Right? Mine is no trifling or foolish tale, like the myths. First there sprang up out of the earth whole natured forms having a due share both water and fire. The elements explain everything, just like nowadays. Chemistry explains everything. Physics and chemistry, that's it. There's nothing else to say. Materialism. Evolution explains where you came from, and so on. The fire designed to reach up to its light produced growth even before they had developed shapely limbs. So from a more primitive form of life to a more sophisticated form of life over time by purely natural causes. Okay?
When you talk about diamond, is it
Yep.
evil? Is it evil spirits or just spirits?
It just means spirit.
It's just spirit.
It does not mean evil spirit. So, do you know where it first meant evil spirit? In the New Testament. So the New Testament is the first place that uses the Greek word daimon for evil spirit. And the reason for that is, think about it. Like, let's say you're a priest and someone comes up and like, hey, Father, or I guess you don't need to be a priest. I've been reading this book called The Course in Miracles, and it says I should have a spirit guide. So, I went down to the store, the New Age store, and I got my amulets, and now I'm talking to my spirit guide. Sound good, guys?
No.
With my amulets and my crystal ball, and go down to the French Quarter in front of the cathedral. Go in front of the cathedral, get my tarot. My spirit guide said I should have my tarot reading in front of the cathedral.
saw that on Saturday.
Bring out the holy one.
It's been like that for, I don't know, probably decades. But you follow the meaning? The point is, like, so that's why the word spirit came to mean demon in the New Testament, because any spirits that are not within, the spirit you're talking to, the crystal ball, that can't be a good spirit, right? The spirit that's using the tarot cards or the Ouija board, like the spirit that's letting you talk to your uncle, that's when, you all get together and start chanting and the Ouija board starts spinning by itself. That's what they call turning tables back in the 1800s, which you can still do. I saw at Walmart. They have a Ouija board. It's like, whoa.
Yep.
It's like you have the cathedral and you have the tarot card. You go to Walmart, you have the Bible and you have the Ouija board. Like, that's kind of this downside of democracy, perhaps, right? It's just you have freedom to make your pick, take your pick, right? So that's why the word spirit just came to mean evil spirit, because any spirit that, the Greeks were talking about from the Jewish perspective were not good spirits, at least, right? That's how it was. That's how the language is used now.
In ancient Greek myth, were the Furies not a type of evil spirit?
So, daimon is it means like it's some kind of divine power that's not on the level of a god. I think the Furies are too powerful to be called daimon. Because if anything, even the gods seem to have a certain respect for them. Like, I think they might predate the gods. Whereas it's like the Titans are older than the gods, so they've kind of lost their power. The Furies are kind of like another set of things, like tied in with fate. So they're a pretty high ranking. And then the daimons are they're messengers between gods and men is how they're defined. So they're like a weaker kind of being. Huh?
So on the same topic,
Yeah.
it feels like the daimons are kind of like a less of a specified being.
In terms of what?
In terms of like, they're not like a named god. They're not like.
That's exactly.
They're weaker. We don't necessarily know.
Right,
what
and
they
even
are.
Homer, like, there's some daimon that did this, there's some spirit that did this. Yeah, they're not typically named, exactly. It's kind of like you could compare a little bit, like, we don't name most angels, because there are certain parallels there, right? Like, and they're defined as messengers.
We would also think of them as spirits.
Yeah. Now, remember, they don't have a clear idea of immaterial spirits. Homer does not have a clear idea. So you got to be careful not to be anachronistic. For him, you breathe out your last breath, your psyche, right? From psychein, to blow. Pneuma is the same thing. The word pnein means psyche means to cool with your breath. Just to tell you what, from psychros, which means cold. And then pnein is blowing, like blowing harder than just breathing. So pnein gives you pneuma. The hagion pneuma is, anybody know?
Holy Spirit.
The Holy Spirit, right? So that's where the New Testament word hagion pneuma is the Holy Spirit, but it goes back to the word to blow, which can also mean wind. So often the words for breath and wind it means both. Whereas daimon, it's not a breath or wind metaphor, it's not an air metaphor, it's just a power metaphor. Some kind of being that has a certain power, but when we hear the word power, we think, oh, it must be really powerful. But they're actually less than the gods or titans, because they're messengers, they're intermediaries. So it's somewhat of an interesting parallel to the idea of angels. Okay, but definitely no clear idea of immateriality. For Homer, when you breathe out your last breath, everything indicates that for him, he's not saying certainly your breath is not tangible. When you breathe out your soul, it's not tangible. But he doesn't have any clear idea that it's immaterial either. He just, whatever it is, your breath leaves and it goes down to Hades unless you don't get buried, in which case it's stuck on Earth. And it has to wander around. So yeah, Homer is basically he doesn't have this idea of immateriality. Like, that's Xenophanes, right? Starting to get around to that. God is not in one place or the other. But the Greek gods are always in one place or the other, even if they take on different forms. So it's very easy to be anachronistic, right? When we read Homer and think, oh, he must be an immaterial soul, because we think of it as immaterial soul. But that's called an anachronism. It's, right? Anachronism is taking something from a later time putting it back into a previous time, even though it doesn't belong there. And really, the idea of immateriality, we have Plato and Aristotle to thank for it. Although I think Anaxagoras and Xenophanes are getting there. I think especially Anaxagoras it becomes more clear. But. Okay, so see how that evolution of living forms, this is decidedly materialistic, naturalistic, right? There's no need for not just God, but anything divine or anything supernatural at all, right? It's all just happening natural. Using the word spirit there, he just means probably the ether, because for Pythagoras, the spirits, right, dwelled in ether. So he can be kind of criticizing Pythagoras there, right? If you, that's what could be going on there, because he's figuring, oh, my old friends who are Pythagoreans are going to read this. So let's go back now, Brian, to what you were reading.
Okay.
What page was it again?
It was 148,
Okay.
file 148.
So publishing some of the Pythagorean verses, some of those things like I'm a fugitive from the gods, like, oh, it's very colorful language. He could be, that could be some of the hidden teaching of Pythagoras, and that's why they were so angry at him, because it is a very striking image, and it doesn't really reflect a materialist mindset at all. So maybe some of those texts, the reason they're so, make you think he was a reincarnationist, is because he's actually quoting Pythagoras. Okay.
Neanthes tells that down to the time of Philolaus and Empedocles, that all Pythagoreans were admitted to the school discussions. But after Empedocles had revealed some of the teachings to the public by speaking of them in his poem, they passed an edict that he should not be allowed to hear any more.
See, so right? That's normally you think, oh, he believes in reincarnation. And you read that, you're like, well, they're actually quite bitter at him. He's an ex-Pythagorean, so yet he still would have held that. And then it seems like he's kind of making fun of it in some cases. So the verses that are making fun of it would be his own. The verses that talk about a very striking image of being a fugitive from the gods, that would be Pythagoras. Remember, right? Some of those Pythagoreans and Platonists, they became Christians. It was a good ground in which Christianity could take root, like the idea that the soul is immortal, that morality matters, forms your soul, that kind of thing. Okay, so let's see. Is there any? All right, I think that's good for Empedocles. All right. So why don't we go on to Anaxagoras, who I've just been talking about. We could read a little bit of the introduction, because like I said, sometimes he's very good. Just getting back to the big picture. I think Matthew, page 155, it says, it's capital letter A.
A. It is possible to accept phenomenon at face value and thus to deny the Eleatic principle.
Okay, so he's coming back to the principle, the Eleatic principle, which is being cannot arise from non-being, right? Ex nihilo nihil fit. So he showed you how Empedocles handles that, basically saying that there's four elements, there's a big bang, there's a big crunch, the world has always been there, so it didn't arise from nothing. And then here he's going to come back to that light of Anaxagoras.
That is to say, it is possible to admit that something now exists, that is, this particular flame with its perceptible qualities, which did not exist previously. Such is the answer given by Heraclitus. It seems, moreover, to be implicit in everyday modes of thought, since the obvious thing to say and think is that while no flame existed before the friction took place, a flame does exist now, and as a result of it. B. A second solution is reductionism, which consists in evading the problem by dismissing the qualities of flame as unreal.
Right, remember I was saying reductionism, like, regarding the human mind? Like, your mind isn't something real, it's just what they would call, they literally would use the word epiphenomenon. Thomas Huxley was like, he was called Darwin the Bulldog. He was Darwin's, I think, cousin, right? And Darwin publicly was more of an agnostic or a deist, even though in his letters he says that he's an atheist. Right? One of his later letters, he said he should have just been bold and said that. But Thomas Huxley was openly an atheist, who was trying to, basically get people to stop being religious, right? Saying this is silly, and we're familiar with this kind of thing. And so he called consciousness an epiphenomenon, right? It's not a real thing. So you're just reducing. There's just your brain, and consciousness. Your brain is real, and your neurons are real, but consciousness is not real. And he had compared it to, he said like a steam engine. He said your brain is a steam engine and consciousness is like the smoke coming out of the chimney. Anyone want to reply to that? How would you reply to that? That's his way of kind of explaining what he means by epiphenomenon.
Oh, I would say the steam is real.
Good. And also, what is he using to explain it?
It's almost like he's using an artifact made by human
Okay.
consciousness.
I mean, what did Aristotle criticize Empedocles for when he said, so what is the sea? Oh, the sea is the sweat of the earth. Like, okay, great. So then I guess the earth is a living body and the earth gets hot and the earth works out and gets sweat. Like,
So he's using metaphor.
Exactly. He's using a metaphor to explain, like, what do you actually mean by epiphenomenon? He's like, well, it's like the steam engine. Your brain is like the steam engine, which is concrete and tangible. And the steam is kind of, not so tangible. That's what your consciousness is like. Well, like you said, Ryan, the steam actually could burn you. I mean, actually, the steam is quite real, if I'm not mistaken. So it's not even a good example. Like, if I were running an example, I'd give an example of maybe like an optical illusion, because steam could, actually, I'd get burnt by steam. I open my hot water heater, I'm not careful, like, ouch. So I actually care, the steam that's more concerned with the steam. I'm more concerned with the steam than I am about the pitcher. Even though the pitcher is a solid, the steam is a gas, right? But so see what I mean? It's kind of, when you actually get into arguments or the claims that materials make, the arguments can be incredibly weak. Like, he gives a metaphor to explain it, right? Which is the tool of rhetoric, not the tool of philosophy, right? Remember we said we're leaving aside, all those kind of things, like figures of speech. So reductionism, dismissing the qualities of flame is unreal. Materialist reduction regarding the human mind, dismissing consciousness is unreal. Whereas to me, like, actually my consciousness in a certain sense is more real than anything else. Because, right, like I said, if I get burned, I mean, my consciousness is more aware of that than, I don't know, like tables and chairs and solids. And you see what I mean? I'm not, without being a subjectivist, right, at some level your consciousness is the most real thing for you, right? And I think you could, on some level that's obvious. So far from reducing it, but anyway, okay, let me keep reading.
Thales, in declaring that water is the single true nature of all existent things, was the first clear proponent of reductionist thinking in Greece.
Right, because even if there are whatever gods and souls and spirits are, they're all made out of water too, right? Okay.
Parmenides and eventually Plato handled the dismissal more universally by declaring all change by its very nature to be unreal.
Right, so remember we saw that with Parmenides, and Plato's say the same thing. The whole physical world is an illusion. So that's the opposite. Like, there's two extremes: reductionist, where, right, everything is just matter, materialist reductionism, and then the other extreme, idealism, where matter doesn't even exist. And then that's why Aristotle is so important, because he doesn't go to either extreme. There's both matter and there's spirit. There's both a material body and there's an immortal soul. Okay?
And the meta-scientific philosophizing that got underway in the 17th century and has continued to dominate theoretical physics from then to the present day.
So meaning, right, the scientific revolution, like jumping ahead to, like I mentioned, Thomas Hobbes.
A distinction is maintained between the spatially definite characteristics that can be traced and measured by scientific techniques and such non-measurable characteristics as the visible yellow and felt warmth, which are the flame's manifest qualities. These manifest qualities become regarded as mere epiphenomena.
So do you reckon, that's what I was just saying, Thomas Huxley, I think he's the one who coined the term, but he's the one who popularized that term, saying your consciousness is just an epiphenomenon. Epiphenomenon means a surface phenomenon, because epi means above. So phenomenon is an appearance, so it means a surface appearance. It's even like less than appearance. That's why I said if he wanted a clever example, he should have given like an optical illusion, not steam, which is actually 100% real. But I guess he didn't really feel like he needed to come up with something very sophisticated. Okay.
Mere subjective results of the vibratory activities which alone are supposed to be real.
Right, so there's only vibrating atoms. The only thing that's real is vibrating atoms. And then everything that we sense is an illusion. You'll see that, you'll see that next semester with the moderns, but we're already going to see it with the atomists. The atomists teach the same thing.
When the qualities are taken as appearances rather than realities, the Eleatic principle does not apply to them, any more than to the content of dreams. The atomism of Lysippus, how do you say that?
That's right.
Okay, Lysippus, and Democritus, to be presented in the next chapter, is an outstanding type of such reductionism in ancient Greece.
Right, so that idea goes back to Democritus and atomists, who are also materialists, saying the soul is made out of atoms. Why don't you just keep reading since it's ABC?
Okay. C. But what if simultaneously the Eleatic principle is upheld and the perceptual qualities of the flame are accepted as real? How is it possible on that double basis to explain the sudden appearance of a hot yellow flame? Assuming that there has not been any appreciable alteration in our visual organs, there seems to be only one possible answer. And the qualities hot and yellow are real in their own right, and they are now observed to exist although formerly they did not exist, and if our visual powers remain virtually unchanged, then the only possible explanation is that the qualities were formerly in hiding, and that somehow the act of rubbing released them and brought them into the open.
Now, once again, I mean, you don't want to necessarily laugh at that. Like I was saying, carbonated water, right? It looks like there's no gas in there, but then when you open it, when you open your can, right, you hear the gas come out, right? So there can be hidden qualities, right, that are there that you can't see. So, okay.
The fire must have been lurking invisibly in the flame, or in the air, or in both, until suitable operation brought it forth. That is in essence, is the type of explanation espoused by Anaxagoras.
Or Anaxagoras. Okay, so you can read the whole introduction on your own, but let's go to page 160. So we have a fair number of fragments here, right, since he's later. General principles, Gerald?
General principles. Because of the weakness of our senses, we are not able to judge the truth.
Okay, keep going.
Appearances are a glimpse of the unseen. The Greeks do not rightly understand what they call coming to be or perishes. And a real thing does not come to be or perish. Occurrences that are so called are simply the mixing and separating of real entities.
So he's agreeing with this idea that something can come from nothing. So what it means is that it already has to be there. Like the fire already has to be there in the wood, and then it becomes apparent if I set the wood on fire. Okay?
For how could hair come from what is not hair, or flesh from what is not flesh?
Okay, so what he's going to do is flip it around. Instead of like hair and blood and bone being made of fire, earth, air, and water, he's actually going to say that fire, earth, air, and water are made of tiny little bits of everything that you visibly see. Literally everything. So a helpful terminological distinction here is between the microscopic, which everyone knows, right? And then the macroscopic, which are opposites. So everything that I can see with the naked eye, that's the macroscopic world. The microscopic world is what I can't see. And so instead of making the microscopic world prior, which is what the atomists are going to do, and say there's these microscopic atoms, and everything that we see is made out of them, he's going to say the microscopic world is full of tiny little bits of the things that make up the macroscopic world. Huh?
So, I'm sorry, is he saying that the tiny little bits are combining to produce the macroscopic? Or is he saying like tiny little bits of invisible air particles are like floating around on my head, and then somehow those things are made manifest? Like you could begin to see the air?
I think both.
Okay.
Because the second example you're giving is biological. So I think he would say, yeah, that sounds good, right? In a biological entity, that it would make sense that it would work that way. So yeah, I think both.
There's no hair particles on your head.
Yeah. Okay, let's keep going.
Such being the case, we must suppose that composite things contain many ingredients of the very greatest variety, the seeds of everything, having all kinds of characteristics, colors, and ways of affecting the sensitivities.
And the sensitivities are just the word senses. Keep going.
The things of the universe are not sliced off from one another with a hatchet, neither the hot from the cold, nor the cold from the hot.
Now you might wonder, what's he getting at there? Well, so this is something that Wheelwright does an excellent job explaining. Wheelwright calls it this is a very ingenious term of his. He says the pre-Socratics had a qualitative chemistry. Now obviously they didn't have the word chemistry. But he's right about that because the way to distinguish the elements was by hot and cold or dry and wet. And Aristotle is going to agree with this, right? The four elements, they were dominant until about 3-4 centuries ago, right? But the periodic table is like brand new in terms of human history, right? Recorded history. And so the fire is hot and dry. Earth is, water is wet and cold. Whatever comes first is what it is first priority. And then earth is dry and then cold, and air is dry and then, no, earth is dry and then, but the point is you take hot and cold and wet and dry, and it gives you the four elements. As you can see, right? Obviously water is going to be wet first, and then I think cold second, and then earth is dry first, and cold second, and air and fire are both dry, but one of them is hot first. Okay, so that's what he's, remember, because that's what Empedocles was doing, right? Slicing off and saying, okay, we have fire that's hot and dry. We have water that's wet and cold. And we have these four things, and everything else comes from them. You follow? Okay.
In everything, there is a portion of everything else, except of mind. And in some things, there is mind also.
Okay, now this is where it would be helpful if he basically downplays Anaxagoras' doctrine of mind, but the mind there should have a capital M because it's a holonous, kind of like holotheos. And so the concept of mind, so what he's going to talk about here is the divine mind. So everything is made of these little bits except for mind, which is transcendent. But in some things there's mind also, meaning humans, right? Humans, we also have mind. So is this materialism? No, right? We're back to monotheism here. Notice kind of reacting against Anaxagoras. See how we keep going back and forth, right? And then also humans are not just material, right? We have a mind that's transcendent. Want to read number 8, Christian?
Whatever there is most of in particular things determines the manifest nature that we ascribe to each.
Right, so, I know this is porcelain. In theory, right, this has a bit of absolutely everything because there's all these tiny bits of everything, but it has a predominance of porcelain, so therefore it looks like porcelain. Now that might sound silly, but it actually is, once again, kind of true, or it is true in terms of atoms. That this is mostly porcelain, but it does have little other bits of atoms. That doesn't have atoms of blood in it, so that's false. But there's other, what they'll call as impurities, and I'm sure that anyone knows anything about like engineering, you can never get anything to be 100% pure. There's going to be some little tiny impurities, but you get it to be 0.000% impurities. Like even purified water, there can be some tiny, minuscule, right? Because molecules and atoms are so small, you're never going to get every atom. Even the vacuum of space, it turns out, there are some atoms floating around. It's not 100% vacuum. There's very few. Did I tell you guys about how space has an odor? When they come in, their spacesuits smell like burning metal, the astronauts, which is quite fascinating. I was like, that doesn't make sense. Well, it does make sense because it turns out there's tiny little bits of charred metal floating around, from, I guess, all the meteors that get turned into vaporized, right, when they hit the atmosphere. But that's from, this guy wrote a book called An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth, and he's the one who mentioned that. So all right, we'll come back to this later. Why don't we do this? We spent a little while on Empedocles today, right, talking about figuring all that out. I don't know if we're going to spend a class on that. We basically did. So let's push the exam back. Instead of Monday the 6th and Wednesday the 8th, let's do the midterm on Wednesday the 8th and Friday the 10th, because the atoms are going to take a little while. The sofas are very important, and then we don't want to rush through Plato. So we'll push it back in class. I mean, technically, I think we have to do it before fall break.
Mm-hmm.
So really, I mean, if it comes to it, we could even push it back another class because of fall. Right, we have to do it before fall break though. Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and will be forever. Amen.